Sunday after Easter. For those of you who celebrate Easter, happy belated Easter since I didn't see you last week. And thanks again for coming today. Today, we're going to start doing a review, well, a walkthrough. We haven't gone through it yet, so it can't be a review, but we're going to start to explore the outer circle on the wheel called the 12 links of dependent origination or dependent arising. But before we do that, there's a couple things. One, I had promised at the end of last class that we would flip on its head our order of what we do in each one of these sessions by starting this session with a meditation practice because it's gotten short shrift in all of the sessions due to my my lengthy presentations. So I'd like to honor that and do that. But before I do that, I just wanted to reiterate something that I brought up during the first session of this course. All of you who were there, I think, remember that we talked about I talked a little bit about our Dharma Center that is hosting this teaching at DNKL, located in Reading, Connecticut. And I've been a long-term member of this community going back years, many years, even before Rinpoche and Geshe Darge, our spiritual leaders at the center, were even there. So it has a deep place in my heart, and without it, I don't know where I'd be in my life. And so it's really important for me personally, and I think for other members of the community, that that DNKL is just there. And with that in mind, you also remember that I talked about how all the teachings that the center offers are free. It's part of the tradition of our lineage not to charge money for the teachings. We've never wavered from that. Again, being a longtime member of the community, I can say that's a fact. And it's the most, it's the most wonderful opportunity for us who like our students there, but then on occasion, like this time, I get a chance to do a teaching myself, to be part of that. It's a good feeling, not to sort of have money connected directly to the teaching. But with that said, we do want the Dharma Center to continue and to operate and to be healthy, to have it be a place that is vibrant and alive and can keep offering teachings and programs in the community for those who live locally. So, just with that in mind, I had said this at the beginning of the teaching that although we don't charge for the teaching, we do welcome donations. Donations are the lifeblood of our center in terms of operationally, on an ordinary level. The real lifeblood of it, of course, is our teachers and what they have to offer us on a daily basis. So I encourage any of you who feel like you're able to make a donation. If you've already made a donation, that's wonderful. If you haven't, if it's possible now or in the future, that would be great. Even if you've donated before, if you have a little bit more you can give, that would be wonderful as well. So, I just wanted to remind you how thankful we should all be for what our center has to offer and providing the opportunity for teachings that come from the center and the teachers there. So with that said, there is at the website, there is a place where you can go and click on to make a donation. There's different programs.
I put a link in the Zoom.
Great. Okay. So there's different programs available. You can one-time donation. You could be a recurring, donating person. You could, there's a variety of opportunities that are available. Um, and for those of you who maybe don't look at the website too often or aren't on our mailing list, I encourage you to go back and look at the website in the coming months. We're going to be making some new programs at DNKL for people to partake in who want to be part of some type of giving program. We're going to be launching some new giving programs. We're really excited about it. Gloria and I and a few others at DNK are directly involved in that. So, and if you're not on our email list, our mailing list, sign up. That way you'll just get a notice every once in a while informing you of not only those sorts of opportunities, but all the ongoing teachings that happen at DNKL and sister organizations as well. So that's my sales pitch for today. Thank you for letting me do that. And we left off last week where we finished up our review of the 6 realms. And we covered each one of them, I think, successfully from the point of view of exploring the mental afflictions, the mental states that are prevalent in each one of those, and some of the antidotes that are available to us on a regular basis if we could find a way to develop certain practices that are connected to each one of the realms that we discussed, over time through the last 3 or 4 sessions. The last 2 realms that we covered were the toughest ones, in terms of being challenging. And we talked about, especially in the last one, when we talked about the hell realms, how important it is to as we develop the ability to sort of do self-reflection. I shared with you the idea of keeping notes or a diary or a book, as I've done for years, that you can use then to take those mental afflictions or mental states that you've identified for yourself and bringing them on the cushion and developing some meditation practices where you can work with them. And one of the big things we talked about was developing, especially in connection with that last realm that we covered, developing a a meditative practice built around loving kindness, and especially loving kindness for yourself. Without that, you're sort of hobbled, which we'll talk about in a minute when we get to the 12 links of dependent origination. And it's important that we have a good, strong sense of self and positive attitude when we're talking about these topics, of what's challenging in our lives from moment to moment, day to day, week to week, as are represented in those 6 realms that we covered. And the one that we covered from a meditation type of practice that is really a good antidote for the last one was the practice of loving kindness. And I read to you, if you might recall, from one of the texts that we're using as a secondary source, Atisha's description of imagining everyone in existence as having been our mother, and him describing passionately and emotionally what it means for a mother to be a mother and how we should experience that. And that's really at the root of the meditation that we're going to do right now. For those of you who jumped on late, I'm fulfilling the promise I made at the end of the last session to start this session with a meditation. We're going to do a meditation on developing loving kindness and compassion as part of starting today's session, because we've been giving meditation practice in each one of these sessions sort of short shrift. So keep that reading that I did by Atisha on the love of a mother as its core to the meditation practice we're going to do. The meditation practice that we're going to do right now is a meditation practice called the 7-part cause and effect meditation practice. So there are eight parts in total. There's a preliminary part and then the 7 parts. And it's very auspicious to do this type of meditation practice while you're studying the Wheel of Life, because the Wheel of Life is literally about discovering truly how karma works, how it takes presence in the wheels that come out from the center wheel of the 3 poisons, and then the 2 types of deeds, and then the 6 realms. And now that we're going to go into today, the 12 links, which is the outer and 4th cycle of on the wheel. So this sets us up nicely to reflect back on leaving sort of behind our study of the 6 realms, although we'll keep them in mind. And as we move forward into the discovery process of what the 12 links of dependent origination have to offer us. So we'll do this meditation now. If all of you would just sort of relax, for you, do whatever's comfortable, sitting on a chair or doing a meditation pose that you might be used to in your own practice. And we'll go into a guided meditation that I'll lead us through. Start by bringing your breath to mind, to focus. Have a keen awareness of the movement of your breath moving in and out of your body. The out breath being the first part, the in breath being the second part. And try to slow it down. Try to slow down the thoughts that are riding on your breath, and clear your breath. See it as something moving open and spaciously, not carrying lots of weight, not carrying lots of thoughts, being calm, flowing evenly, slowly. As I said, open and spacious. Whatever visualization works for you to bring that to your breath. So we'll start with the first part, which is cultivating equanimity. So the foundation for practicing the 7-point cause and effect method is cultivating a mind of equanimity. Without this foundation, you will not be able to have an impartial, compassionate, altruistic view, because without equanimity, you will always have partiality towards your relatives and friends. Realize that you should not have prejudice, hatred, or desire towards enemies, friends, or neutral persons. And thus, with this in mind, lay a firm foundation of equanimity. With that foundation, we'll next bring our mind to the realization of recognizing all as having been our mother or our friend. This is the first step on the 7-part cause and effect meditation. Cultivate the recognition of all sentient beings as having been one's mother. Perceive all sentient beings as having been your own kind mother. A recognition of others as being your dearest ones need not be confined to recognizing them as mothers alone. You can also view them as having been your best friend or closest relatives. The point is to bring about an effect within your mind and to develop a state of mind that will enable you to perceive all living beings as closest objects of affection and kindness. With this in mind, cultivate this recognition of all sentient beings as having been one's mother or closest friend. The second part is reflecting on all beings' kindness, recollecting the kindness of all beings. You visualize the person to whom you feel closest, be it your mother, your father, or closest friend. But do it where you can visualize them as being quite old, even if they're not currently quite old. Try to visualize them in that way. Doing this has a special significance, for it will make your meditation more powerful and effective. Now see that their kindness has been boundless towards you from the time of your birth, before that time during gestation, all of the hardships that they went through, and then even after birth, surrendering all their own happiness and pleasure for your sake, for your happiness, for your pleasure. And what joy they felt at the time of your birth. What a treasure they found. And according to their own capacity, they did everything to protect you. After reflecting upon this particular kindness, visualize other beings whom you feel quite distant and repulsed by, even animals, and take them as your object of visualization. Think that although these enemies are harmful to you and are your adversaries in this life, imagine that in the past, they must have been your most dearest parents and must have even protected and saved your life. Therefore, their kindness is boundless. In this manner, you should train your mind, even if you have to use your imagination at this point in your meditation practice. This is the second part of reflecting on all beings' kindness. The next part, which is part 3, is developing an intention to repay that kindness. The thought to repay the kindness of mothers or your closest friend will come about naturally when you have been successful in recollecting this kindness. It should come from the depths of your heart. Try to remember the reading that I did last week by Atisha. And not to repay their kindness would be unfair and ungrateful of you. Therefore, you should work according to your own capacity for the benefit of others. Doing this repays their kindness. This leads to part 4, generating loving kindness. Having cultivated equanimity and the recognition of all sentient beings as having been one's mother or closest friend, you will see all sentient beings as objects of affection and endearment. And the more forceful your feeling of affection towards them, the stronger will be your aspiration that they be free from suffering and enjoy happiness. So the recognition of others as having been one's mother is the foundation for the rest of this meditation. Having laid that proper foundation, Recollect their kindness and develop the genuine wish to repay it. You gain a state wherein you feel close to and affectionate towards all living beings. So now reflect that all these sentient beings, although they naturally desire happiness and wish to avoid suffering, are tormented by unimaginable sufferings. Reflect upon the fact that they are just like yourself in desiring happiness, but they lack this happiness. By such reflection, cultivate loving kindness. The fifth part is generating compassion. When you do this meditation on compassion, reflect upon the manner in which sentient beings undergo the experience of suffering. First, in order to have a very strong force of compassion, visualize a person undergoing active sufferings. You can visualize any situation that you find unbearable. Doing so will enable you to have a strong force of compassion and make it easier to develop a genuine, universal compassion. Then think about the sentient beings in other categories. They may not be undergoing manifest suffering right now, but due to indulging in negative actions that will definitely produce undesirable consequences in the future, they are certain to face such experiences. The wish that all sentient beings who lack happiness be endowed with happiness is the state of mind called universal love. And the wish that sentient beings be free of suffering is called compassion. These two meditations can be undertaken in combination until there's some kind of effect or change in your mind. And part 6 is to develop a high resolve of universal responsibility. Your cultivation of love and great compassion should not be left in a state of mere imagination or a wish. Rather, develop a sense of responsibility, a genuine intention to engage in the task of relieving sentient beings of their suffering and providing them with happiness. Because of their ignorance, sentient beings do not know the right methods by which they can fulfill their aims. It is the responsibility of those who are equipped with this knowledge to fulfill the intention of working for their benefit. Commit oneself to taking on such a responsibility. It's like striking a deal in business and signing a contract. After generating the extraordinary attitude, ask yourself whether or not, although you have developed the strong courage and determination to work for the benefit of other sentient beings, you really possess the capacity and capability to bring them genuine happiness. Although you may be able to work for other sentient beings to bring them temporary happiness, bringing them their ultimate aim is possible only when these beings take upon themselves the initiative to eliminate the misapprehension within themselves. The same is true of yourself. If you desire to attain happiness, it's your responsibility to take the initiative to eliminate the misapprehension within yourself. Part 7 is what we call in Buddhism engendering an altruistic intention to become enlightened. Based on the foundation of love and compassion, you should generate from the depths of your heart the aspiration to achieve the completely enlightened state for the benefit of all sentient beings. The cultivation of such a mind constitute the realization of bodhicitta. So after the meditation on generating bodhicitta, you should engage in the practice of cultivating bodhicitta that takes the result into the path. So slowly bring your attention back to your breath and start to breathe normally. Let go of that focus and bring yourself back to where we are now. So hopefully that's something that you all can gain some benefit from. It's very much connected to what we discussed in our last class. And we have now fulfilled that promise that I made to do a meditation on, I feel what's really important is the development of loving kindness when you're doing this sort of study and reflection, especially what we discussed last couple of sessions. We talked about the lower realms. Quite helpful. So today we're going to start a discussion about the 12 links of dependent origination. And it's also known as dependent arising, and commonly known as dependent arising. But in the context of the wheel, it's more appropriate to talk about it as dependent origination, because what we're going to discuss and describe is how all life experience originates, how it takes form, how it's experienced, and how that cycle repeats itself endlessly. So if we start by anchoring this to the knowledge we've gained by looking at the inner circles, we have discussed, of course, how everything starts with our inner circle, the three poisons being the primary afflictive states. There's many more that are subsets of that, but they're the primary. And how on that basis we partake in what's described in the next circle, the semicircles of activities, non-virtuous activities and virtuous activities. And from there, we see how experiencing the results of that, because we remember we put that in the context of karmic ripening, and we described and explained how karma works and creates and results in the moment by moment, week by week, day by day experience that projects us into a mental state, an emotional experience of one of those six realms. So those are the three sets of circles we've explored in detail thus far. But what we're going to do now is we're going to dive into looking at the actual process that each one of us do partake in as sentient beings, especially as looking at it from the point of view of human experience. After all, we're living in the human realm. And as we learned when we talked about the human realm, this is an ideal realm for studying and reflecting upon and meditating on and transforming suffering types of existence into non-suffering types of experiences and mental states. So we have a great opportunity here. And of course, the Buddha who gave us this wheel did so for the benefit of sentient beings in the human realm. And we can reflect on that and keep all of that in mind when we start to explore the 12 links of dependent origination. Now, I will say, for those of you who are not, Buddhist in terms of practicing or even being, somewhat thoroughly on board with the frame of reference that Buddhists practice, one of the challenging things in discussing the 12 links of dependent origination, more than the other 3 circles that we've discussed. So for example, in the realms, we tried to really stay very much on track to talk about each one of those realms as being mental states of existence, and not to equate them necessarily to being literally realms where you would, environmentally speaking, where you would live. Not that that's something that isn't, one doesn't mutually exclude the other, excuse me. But we tried to keep it in that frame of reference because we're trying to have it be relatable to anyone, and to see how the wheel really does have what has something to offer us when we look at those different realms of experience. When we get to the 12 links of dependent origination, all the traditional commentaries and teachings that are available about the 12 links of dependent origination are very much like rooted in a very deep cosmological experience or cosmology framework that it comes from various schools of Buddhist practice. So it's not exclusive to any one, but they describe a process where you're moving through life, where you're literally moving through one life to another life. And I'll get into that in detail as we start talking about the first link, the second link, and so on. And within the 12 links, there's actually overlapping life events that are moving an individual from a previous life into this life, and then setting us up to move into the next life. So simultaneously, there's actually overlaid through the 12 links as they're occurring simultaneously in one's life, because even though they're progressive, and we're going to talk about them progressively, all of them are happening at every single moment. Just like we talked about in the 6 realms, that you aren't mutually exclusive in any one realm. It's a layered, subtle, complex experience where you could be in one realm at one moment and in another realm in the next. But for the 12 links, what I'm trying to say is it's challenging to talk about the 12 links outside of that Buddhist frame of reference. I'm going to talk about it within that frame of reference because, as a teaching that the wheel is, it is literally giving us a map of how the cycle of life continues endlessly. Not just the cycle of mental states or afflictive states. That we were able to explore within some pretty contemporary boundaries, leaving the whole cosmology of the framework of previous lives, this life, intermediate states between those lives, projecting in from one life to another. We were able to leave most of that on the sideline. So I won't be able to do that as I talk through the 12 links, today and in the next session. But what I will do is, as I'm doing that, I will point out with emphasis, and I'll give you a structure for how to see how you can listen to that take that into consideration, but to a certain degree, leave it on the shelf, leave it on the sideline, in the sense of like being able to get in the here and now some real substantive knowledge about how the 12 links work and how we can work within those experiences that are described chronologically in the 12 links, but as I said, are going on all the time, how we can work with them, which links and what they describe and what they represent that we can focus on in practice. And even within the Buddhist framework that I'm going to describe, and outside of that, leaving that sort of on the sidelines, the same applies. You'll see that there's a lot that one can do in terms of gaining knowledge of all 12 links of dependent origination and putting that upon your own reflection and possibly with some questions into your own context of understanding and relatability, more important, relatability, that doesn't have to be anchored in Buddhist cosmology. So that's a big, like, sort of flashing sign to put up here. Even for example, the two main texts that we use for this this set of sessions, one of them, we really, most of the readings that we did over the past 3 sessions came from Awakening from the Daydream, which is David Nichtern's book. His book, if you look at it closely, anchors itself in a full description of the 6 realms. He's really contemporizing what the wheel has to offer by really not putting blinders on, but focusing mostly in his text on what those 6 realms have to offer anyone, somebody who's a Buddhist or not a Buddhist. You'll notice in that same text that he only mentions the 12 links of dependent origination or dependent arising, like in a diagram over like a page and a half. And part of that is the purpose of that book, and I'm not, David and I've never talked about this, but the purpose of that book was really very much to relate his personal experiences as a Buddhist and what he learned from the wheel and from his teachers, and translating that to a general audience. So we're mostly a general audience here in this class, and I'm very aware of that. But I also wanted to meet the challenge of talking about the 12 links of dependent origination, this fourth wheel within the wheel of life, in a detailed way, where we could explore together and find its meaning that we can relate to in a contemporary way. It hasn't been done before in any text or even in any teachings you'll find online. Probably some other teachers have done something about this, but I'm not aware of it. And, that's my own shortcoming if there are some teachings about it. So all of that's meant to say, sort of be patient with the framework as it is overtly Buddhist, because it does have deep meaning for Buddhists and the intention of how the Buddha brought the wheel forward as a teaching and therefore must be honored. But we will explore how the 12 links of dependent origination as embodied in the wheel, what they have to offer sort of beyond the sort of the bounds of Buddhist cosmology. So enough said about that. I think you understand what I'm saying. But the one thing that the wheel's outer circle, the 12 links of dependent origination, really are all about, no matter how you want to look at them, as it relates to those 3 inner circles, is that they do describe the process. That's the word to underline. The process that we undergo as we move forward with every single movement of our mind and every action that evolves out of the movement of our mind. Remember, we talked about that when we talked about karma and how karma works. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. But the real punchline of the teaching of the wheel and what this last discussion about the 12 links, the outer wheel, really give us the opportunity to discover is really what the Buddha addressed in terms of why he even gave us this teaching. It's the big problem. And the big problem is, how do we discover a way out of the cycle of what we call conditioning, which is all comes out of our misapprehension, the three poisons that are in the middle of the wheel. How do we do that? Is there a way that that's possible? And it's even said that on the night of his enlightenment, the Buddha's enlightenment, he worked his way backwards through the law, if you will, or the teachings of dependent origination or dependent arising, seeking that place in that process of release. Where can you have release from this conditioned, repetitive cycle that we're stuck in? He worked his way back from old age, disease, and death. And why is there old age, disease, and death? And the answer was because of birth, because we're born, those things happen. And then the next question is, why is there birth? Because of all the actions of becoming, those movements of the mind I talked about, all those volitional activities, motivated by what? The three poisons: greed, hatred, delusion, or misapprehension. Why are we involved in those kinds of activities? Because of grasping. Why is there grasping? Because of desire in the mind. Why is there desire? Because of feelings. Because the quality of pleasantness and unpleasantness arises. Why is there feeling? Because of contact that we have in existence. Why is there contacts? Because of the sense spheres and the whole mind-body phenomena. So, he wrestled with that, and the real dilemma was, could he find a way to take that process, discover its source, and not only reverse it as he did in this meditative exercise, but rather break it, end it. And that's what we'll discover when we go through the 12 links of dependent origination. As a presenter on this particular part of the topic, I will point out with emphasis, if you know anything about me, I will put emphasis on certain things I think are really important. I will put emphasis on which, not only how the wheel is structured and how it works from link to link, but the particular links that will supply the opportunity to us to break the chain, if you will, if you think of it as being sort of a chain of endless repetition. So this is how important this part of the teaching is. If everything we've learned is important, and I've said it is, it's all foundational. The three inner circles are foundational to really understanding the process that we go through every single moment of our existence, and finding and identifying where we are in that process will be discovered as we go through the 12 links, especially if we're mindful. In the 6 realms, we talked about being mindful and recording and being using self-examination to be aware of what mental afflictive states we're in, thereby what realm might we be in. Well, I'm going to want that sort of same process or exercise or focus that we brought to that exploration of the 6 realms to be brought to the 12 links of dependent origination, in the sense of becoming aware of, first, knowledgeable about the 12 links and what they are and how they're connected and how they're always occurring, but where is the opportunity to break to break the cycle. And for the Buddha, um, he was looking to find a way to break it in an ultimate sense. And what that really meant for him was not only from a day-to-day existence of having happiness versus suffering, but ultimately in the sense of like ending death, ending suffering and ending the ultimate form of suffering, which is death. Um, and really showing us a path to deathlessness. And that's present on a deep level in the Four Noble Truths of the Buddha. We've talked about those previously. And they're present in all of his teachings, because that's the goal of Buddhist practice. Um, but as we've said throughout this course, that doesn't have to be our ultimate goal, especially if you're not practicing Buddhism. But I need to mention that because, again, the framework here is important in that sense. So really, if we discover like where we're generating through the cycle of exploration of the 12 links of dependent origination, where are we generating that energy that leads to birth, disease, old age, and death, we can start to work with that energy and transform it, change it, and you could actually move to a place where you're able to end that cycle. Certainly on a mental affliction state level, if you will, but Buddhism again teaches that you can do it ultimately as well. So, the way I look at it is every moment of awareness that we're experiencing is a hammer stroke on the chain of conditioning. We're constantly, every single second, conditioning ourselves to stay in the cycle of samsara existence, of cyclic existence. And our goal here is to strike it with the force of wisdom and awareness. And if we do that, and I talked about this in previous sessions, if we do that with practice and over time, you can start to break the chain, first by having it become weaker and weaker until it actually breaks. And that's what practice is all about. That's what this is about. If this doesn't offer you something practical, whether you're looking for ultimate freedom from birth, disease, old age, and death, but from that suffering existence we talk so much about during our exploration of the 6 realms. And that's got to be kept in focus, because without that, it's like, well, this is kind of cool, but why are we doing this? Why are we talking about all this? So, with that said, what I want to do now is I want to just do a walkthrough of the 12 links, and I'm going to share the screen for a moment. You'll see yourselves first, because I'm going to actually share my desktop and then I'll switch it. So these are those familiar images that we've shown on a number of occasions. One is the contemporary wheel, one is the traditional wheel. And you can see, hopefully it's probably hard to see on your computer, but on the outer ring, there are 12 images and you can see it more clearly, I think, in the contemporary rendition, just because of the reproduction, the digital reproduction that I have. And then, of course, they're also present in the traditional one. And further, we can look at these individually. These are very small, and I apologize, but these are two different representations of each one of the links. And so this is the first one, and that's the one we're going to start talking about right now. But before we do that, I wanted to just do a quick walkthrough of the 12 links. This is the first one. This is called traditionally ignorance. And we'll talk about it in more detail in terms of what it's about in a few minutes. The second one, I'll bring it up here. It's the one that's, brought up bigger, is a person who's actually a potter, who's actually doing the activity of creating a pot. And we'll talk about that in depth here. The next one is an image of a monkey who is moving about. The one on the left shows a monkey moving about a tree. The one on the right shows a monkey moving about a room. You'll see, for lots of reasons, that one, when we start talking about this particular link, why that one is maybe more appropriate, because this has to do with consciousness, the third link, and represented by the monkey being like our mind, the mind that moves and jumps about and isn't very steady, focused, alert, mindful, and peaceful. And the one on the right, where the monkey's jumping from window to window, kind of shows the activity that's connected to different. Each window represents a different form of consciousness, which we'll get into when we start talking about the third link. And then the fourth link is represented by people on a boat. These are both pretty similar. I mean, they look different, but they're pretty similar. And we'll get into talking about what that really means, but that represents the link called name and form. And then the fifth link, I don't have one for some reason on this side, do I? No, I don't have a fifth link. Don't know what happened to that one. So the one on the right is the house that shows empty windows. And specifically in the middle, on the top floors, there's 6 empty windows, which stand for the sense spheres. That's the fifth link. And then the sixth link is what's called contact. The one on the right on the left shows 2 people lying together, kissing. The one on the right shows 2 people also kissing, just in a different position, standing. And that stands for the sixth link, which is called contact. And then the seventh link is kind of graphic. One is a man on the left and a woman on the right. And there's an arrow going through the person's eye, very painful. And that stands for the link of feeling. There's lots of different kinds of feeling, and obviously this shows a painful feeling, which is really the focus of suffering types of feelings being the main theme of this particular link, versus pleasant kind of feelings. And then the eighth link is on the left is a man drinking what is called, we refer to him as drinking beer. And then the one on the right is a little bit clearer that the person is probably drinking a beer. And then this stands for the eighth link, which is attachment. This is where you start to get attached to things. And then the ninth link, again, is a monkey, very similar to the one that we had in the third link. And this stands for the ninth link, which is grasping, which is something that clearly evolves out of attachment. And again, it's represented by a monkey because we tend to grasp onto things, and not just one thing, but many things in a very chaotic way. So the representation of a monkey quickly jumping around to tree branches, you can sort of see how that might apply here. And we're going to come back to the 8th and 9th parts and in much detail in terms of those being particular links that are connected to what we can do in the here and now to work with, versus some of the other links that are kind of already set in place as we're experiencing them at this point in our existence. So 8 and 9 then lead to 10, which is in this image, a person who is pregnant. You can see in both pictures, a little clear on the right that the person's pregnant. And this stands for the link of existence, as it is motivated by the previous two links specifically. They lead to existence, and have the pregnant woman is there for lots of reasons, but one is that it's not fully formed yet. It's in process. So that's something we'll talk about what that's a key to as we move through the links in further detail. And the 11th link is a woman giving birth, or having given birth. The one on the right again is a little clearer because right in her right arm, there's an infant baby. And so very clearly is a new birth. And then in the 12th link, this is the one where we see on the left a person carrying quite a load, if you will, on their back. And on the right, we have a person who appears to be either passed out or in the process of dying possibly, or has an illness, lying across a rock. This is the 12th link, which stands for aging and death. So those are the 12 links that are on the outer edge of the wheel. And just to bring those back up here, that go around the very outer. And of course, outside of that, we have other imagery, but we're not going to talk about that today. We've talked about them previously. Let's stop sharing my screen. So the first one is the one that's represented by a blind person. Maybe I'll put that back up better than looking at me. Put that back up.
And real quick, what was number 2?
Number 2 is the potter.
Okay.
You see it up there? I don't know if you got your computer.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's this one here. I'm just giving 2 different representations.
Yep.
So the first one is represented by a very old person. And it symbolizes ignorance or misapprehension. And specifically, you would say, well, why an old person? And the person's old because it's meant to give you a sense that the experience of being in existence, remember, this is the first link in, is beginningless. It goes on and on and on and never ends. So the idea of the old person is that, hey, I've been going through this for a long time. It's not new. So that's literally why it's an old person. And then further, the person's actually considered to be blind. And the reason that the person's blind, and this is the fundamental link not only the first link, but the fundamental link that takes us back to the center circle, the first circle. The person is misapprehending, is ignorant, is obscured with respect to the true nature of persons and all phenomena. Everything is misapprehended, and therefore everything that they experience is falsely experienced. It's not experienced in a true way. Um, and and more importantly, it's not just that they're misapprehending, but they're actively misapprehending. And that's what's going to be leading us into the second link. And that's important to note. And if you reflect it back to the inner circle, this is why we show in many traditional representations of the wheel that out of the mouth of the pig comes the rooster, comes the snake and the rooster. That they basically, all activity that occurs is based on misapprehending. So this is a very important aspect of the symbol here. And then the cane is the third item that is in the picture, and this is meant to show that the person who has a cane isn't very steady, right? And it means that, sort of no matter how much suffering their misapprehending creates, it's not based on they don't have the strength to sort of find truth to move away from misapprehending. And at the same time, it means that what they are basing their misapprehension on is a very shaky falsehood, a very shaky experience of all things, and therefore they're hobbling. So you can see it sort of has two edges. So this is really an important aspect of it. And there's two types of ignorance. There's a basic form and a secondary form. And the secondary form has to do with what we've talked about previously, which is that coming from this second circle, the semicircles of positive and negative or virtuous and non-virtuous activity, that's what is considered secondary misapprehending, that we partake in things in an uninformed way. They might be good, they might be bad, they might be mixed, they're probably mixed. But the basic or primary form of misapprehending is that experience of moment by moment reality, where we perceive that a person, people, and phenomena are inherently self-existent, that they actually exist in and of themselves. And that's a big, it might sound like a one-liner, but this is one of the things that we'll be doing as we move forward in a couple of our meditation practices, where we try to drill down on that. When we talk about something inherently existing, we mean that it has its own, individually, it has its own fixed quality that doesn't change and that it can be identified. And that's what we mean that something inherently exists, where in reality, it exists only, and this is where the name of the 12 links come from. We call them the 12 links of dependent arising. They only exist, all things only exist in dependence on other things, arising in connection with other things. And that's always changing moment by moment. And without that knowledge, we're putting our left foot forward, our right foot forward, so on, in a blind way, like an old person who's been doing it forever, and in a very unstable way because it is not based on anything very not provable. If one were to explore the nature of this basic nature of someone or something, we would not be able to find its inherent quality that is fixed and never changing. So this is something that is what it's all about from the point of view of how the 12 links of dependent originating start. We can kind of see, not kind of see, but we can see in this picture here on the right, on the left, that the person is moving. They are taking steps. They're not standing still. That's really important because that represents their movement of their mind, their movement forward, putting one foot in front of the other and continuing on and on and on. Again, even though it's the first link, it isn't the beginning of their existence. It's been going on endlessly. In Buddhism, we say since beginningless time, meaning it's always been going on. And that the way they're proceeding is incorrect. It's on the basis of the three poisons. And then they're taking actions secondarily of good deeds or bad deeds, but fundamentally, they are moving forward in a way where they are not seeing what is clearly a wrong view, as we call it. And if you might remember, in the 10 non-virtuous and virtuous activities that we covered weeks ago, the 10th non-virtuous activity, because the first three are of body and the next four are of speech, and then the last three are of mind. The very last one of mind is wrong view. And this is what we're talking about, that you're experiencing things in an incorrect way. And so this is a whole topic unto itself, in terms of the Buddha having given us teachings to explore the true nature of existence and of ourselves and of all phenomena. But in its most basic explanatory form, in the context of the wheel, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about this sort of experience here. And it's all experience of body, speech, and mind. And, it's something to really contemplate. And as we talk through all the previous sessions of the sort of structure of cyclic existence in the form of the three inner circles, we could see how the fourth, which is the process of experiencing life, we could see how this could be like, we sort of now have set ourselves up to kind of put our wrong foot forward constantly, and how do we break this cycle? We're already starting to say that, like if we're experiencing everything incorrectly or misapprehending everything, and this is represented here in the first link, you could see what I said in my introductory comments, that this chain is pretty it's pretty substantive. How are we going to break that? It's really the question. But that's what the wheel is here to teach us, that there is a way to do that. So as we move into the second link, there's a lot more we could say about that. This could be a whole class just talking about the true nature of existence. But as we move into the second link, which I'll bring up here, let me get the other one up here too. There's the potter. So both of these are showing us a representation of the second link, which is called action, in the form of a person, a skilled craftsman for that, for that matter, a very specific activity of making pottery. And His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, in the text that we've been using, talks about this potter being someone who he says a potter takes clay and forms it into a new article. And similarly, an action begins a sequence that leads to a new consequence. He's talking about, in the context of once we are blindly moving forward, as we move, that's like symbolic of your mind moving. And if your mind's moving, your consciousness is active. And if your consciousness is active, you're now starting the process of making karmic formations of action, speech, and mind. So that's what he's talking about when he says that. And he further says that once a potter spins the wheel, it will keep turning as long as it is needed without further striving and exertion. He says, similarly, when an action has been done by a sentient being, this is like when an action's completed, and I'm going to back up and talk about that a little bit more in a minute. It establishes what we call a predisposition in the mind, and it produces a completed action. And that predisposition is what has the potential to continue, just like the potter on the wheel, unhindered until it produces its effect. So he's talking about a very fundamental reality of karmic experience in the form of action. The second link is all about that movement forward, moment by moment, split second by split second of the mind, where, like the potter, taking the action of working with unformed clay, that's sort of like the raw movement of our mind, and then starts to spin it into a specific form. This is what he's analogizing, or the Buddha is, and His Holiness is just explaining why would you have this image explaining the second link in the chain. And I find that really, really important, which is why I'm pointing that out. And I think that it's something that we have to remember as everything should be now connecting for you. Those who've been attending all the sessions should be connecting to you all the way back to the innermost circle and the circle of activities, non-virtuous and virtuous activities. We should be able to see how these first two links really get the ball rolling. They really get the ball rolling. And then further, when we talk about action, there's something to really sort of delve into more deeply. If you study karma, and that could be a whole class into itself, studying karma and emptiness. But if you look more closely at what does it mean to complete an action, you would see that there's lots of factors. There's lots of factors to completing an action. And we can go into those in detail. And I encourage you to read more closely the primary text, our other primary text, which is the Wheel of Life, the Buddhist perspective on cause and effect, because His Holiness, and also Jeffrey Hopkins, who wrote the introduction to the book, talks in great detail about the different parts of action of body, speech, and mind that complete a action whereby it then is planted in the consciousness of a person. And I'll sort of make it more simple for the purpose of this course, where when we talk about an action being taken of body, speech, or mind, as I said, there's lots of factors which make it a complete or not a complete action. But when one is completed, the action's completed, it then is finished. The action's finished. And only when an action is finished, actually finished, can it be planted in the consciousness of the person who took that action. And that action is that process I just described is what we call the cause consciousness. And that is the first part of the third link, the one that has the monkey. The cause consciousness is that movement of the mind that once it's completed, it is its potency, its predisposition, that His Holiness talked about, is infused. It's infused or planted is the other word I like to use, in the consciousness that exists at that time. And it's a very, very brief period of mind or consciousness. It occurs immediately upon the completion of the action, like I just said. It's not a long period of time. It's not something that's drawn out. It happens very, very quickly. And once it happens, it establishes that potency or that predisposition. It could be virtuous, it could be non-virtuous, it could be mixed. It could be something really terrible like a murder, or it could be something innocent as a small lie. But it doesn't matter what it is. Your consciousness, one's consciousness, is not discriminating. It doesn't already have characteristics. It's empty. There's no inherent fixed self in that consciousness. And because of that, it's neutral. It doesn't have any characteristic. And that, so that when a finished action is completed and then is infused in that consciousness, there it is. It's just there. And it's there so that it can then ripen and manifest at a later date. So in the context of Buddhist cosmology, here I'm going into sort of the Buddhist framework, this could be a potency that happens in a future lifetime. It could be like in the very next lifetime, or it could be like eons from now. It depends on the characteristic of the predisposition or the potency of that imprint. In an ordinary sense, putting it out of the framework of Buddhist cosmology, it could be something that is planted and ripens at a later time. Again, putting multiple lifetimes aside. But I want to be clear that in the framework of moving from the first link to the second link to this third link, that it's meant to teach how things work over a long period of time, because that's how karma works from a Buddhist point of view. So, and then as one moves along and is doing actions, now at this point, the links aren't, remember, the links are going on simultaneously. It's not like one leads to the other, to the other, to the other, and the one before it ends. A blind person is taking steps forward in that shaky way all the time. And that blind person's us, individually. And we are taking actions in the way described constantly. And we're having the cause consciousness, that potency infused in our consciousness like all the time. So, these aren't little things that just sort of happen along the way. They're happening, an unfathomable amount of times through the flow of time that a consciousness is existing in this ordinary way, this misinformed, misapprehending way. So this, as we've now moved into this third link, we have the first part of it, the first part of it being the cause consciousness, because this third link is called consciousness. So it has two parts. The first part is cause consciousness, which I just described. And then the second part is called effect consciousness. The effect consciousness is that potency that was implanted, that predisposition in the consciousness once that action was completed, and it's nourished along the way. And it could be from a time-space continuum point of view. It could take a really long time. It could take a shorter period of time. And from a Buddhist, framework, it could happen in this lifetime, the next lifetime, or many, many, many lifetimes from now in terms of when it comes to fruition. And the point, though, is when it does, it is very specific in Buddhist cosmology. And I'll talk about that first. Hopefully this isn't too confusing or too complex. And then I'll talk about it in a non-Buddhist context. In a Buddhist context, this is a very specific potency that we're talking about. It's one, or predisposition. It's one that is a specific type that is the cause for the primary form in which you will take rebirth in your next life. And everything that goes on between, and it takes effect right at the end, the very end of the life you're in now. That's when it starts, that ripening, that full activation. And then that full activation is called the effect consciousness, because now we move from it being an action taken, planted or infused, and then ripening. And then once it is ready to be fully activated, it happens right at the end of one's life. And that's what makes this one a particularly important one from the point of view of being called a very specific type of consciousness. And it's called, just to put another layer on it, as a subset of effect consciousness, it's called the projected effect. And it's the one that it's called projected because it projects you into your next life. And from a Buddhist point of view, that has to do with that moment you die, it's fully activated, and then you go into what's called an intermediate state before you're reborn. And what's driving you, what's projecting you moment by moment in that intermediate state is one activity. You're just seeking a place to take rebirth. That's your one motivation. There is nothing else that's motivating you. Yes, your consciousness is carrying all kinds of karmic potential ripenings along with it, but it's that primary projected karma that started right at the last moment of the previous life, now in the intermediate state, then being projected into a new life. I won't go into talking about the intermediate state and the whole structure of that from a Buddhist cosmology point of view, but suffice to say that once that consciousness finds that rebirth, and it has to be a specific type of rebirth. There's a ripening karmic activity here that will only allow that consciousness to be born in a specific realm. Um, and I can go into a lot of details about that, but we'll leave it at that. And that's something that once you find your rebirth, that's the moment of conception. And the first moment of new life is the moment in a Buddhist framework, is the moment of conception. And that's the completion of the effect consciousness known as a projected effect, the one primary karmic ripening that's moving you from one life to another. And you can have all kinds of other karmic ripenings that accompany that projected effect that gives you your primary rebirth occur once you are fully actualized as, in a new life, such as maybe you're somebody who's very healthy your whole life, but maybe another person, you might be somebody who has lots of illnesses. There could be all kinds of other conditioned karmic ripenings that colorize and fill in, so to speak, your existence in whatever realm it is. And this, from a karmic point of view, this is what explains how an individual consciousness's experience in any realm, let's just stick with the human realm, could be so different for each one of us. How we look physically, where we're born, what kind of quality of life we have. Are we sick? Are we healthy? Do we have, mental disabilities? Do we have a short life or a long life? So these are, from a karmic ripening point of view, all connected to taking those first steps in the blind, hobbled way that we do in the first link. And then we take actions, and then we move into consciousness. This is kind of how things work. From a non-Buddhist perspective, we can kind of look at this as a process where we move uninformed through our life, misapprehending things, and we take actions, and then we have karmic, infusions in our consciousness, which lead to that non-virtuous ripening that projects us into different mental states in the different realms that we've discussed over the past 2 or 3 weeks. And then you can kind of take that process that we've learned so far and see how it fits into this cycle of dependent arising links that we're describing. So you can take and remove sort of the life to life, kind of experience that's being detailed here, and how it's propelled by these processes that we're discussing in a Buddhist context, and kind of remove them if it's something that you don't quite buy into. It doesn't undermine the process, and that's what I want to focus on here, is the process. So if we just back up a second, I kind of jumped ahead and talked about what happens when you go beyond the effect consciousness. It takes you into the fourth link, which is the realm of name and form. We didn't quite get there yet. I kind of jumped ahead, but essentially the consciousness is broken in, link is broken into 2 parts: the cause consciousness, which is that karmic action that's been ripened and has been completed and then planted in the consciousness. That's the cause. And then once it's fully ripened, that's when the effect happens. And in a Buddhist context, it happens right at the moment. A very specific one called projected effects happens right at the last moment of a life and then carries through an intermediate state and then is completed, that particular effect consciousness, upon conception in a new life. And that's kind of as far as we got here in that sense before we really moved to name and form. And before I do that, I'll go to one more visual. Hopefully you guys can see this. We didn't talk on the right, it lists all the different 12 links of dependent arising. Notice they're not in order. But what this is a picture of, and I'll send this little, cheat sheet to you, it's a picture of how those 3 links of ignorance, attachment, and grasping, which happens to be, 2 of the 3 poisons, because attachment and grasping are just varying degrees of attachment. They're associated with ignorance. And then action, we just talked about one of the ones that is action, which is the second link, the whole karmic process that I described. And then you'll find out later when I get to, stay tuned, when I get to talking about link 8 and 9, how important they are in terms of working with moving into number 10, which is existence as a link. And that's, just to give you a teaser, those are the links 8 and 9, where we have the real potential to work with the 12 links effectively to break down the chain that is the endless cycle of these 12 links. And that's exciting. We'll get to that. And then number 3 lists what we call the production of suffering. It's like, hey, once we've been moving forward in an ignorant way, and then we take action, which is number 1 and 2, and then we have cause consciousness happen, then we have effect consciousness happen, which is conception in a new life, and then all these other realities happen, experiences happen in connection with once suffering is actually created. In other words, we move into a conscious experience of the 6 realms. We do that by taking name and form, and we develop sense. We have contact, we have feeling, we develop attachment. That attachment leads to grasping, and then the cycle continues from there. So this is kind of a nice picture to keep in your mind, to hold together, like glue together, as I start talking about the details of the different links, kind of how they fit in together as an experience. And again, I'll send that to you. There's also a wonderful graphic on page 15 of the Wheel of Life by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, page 15 of Jeffrey Hopkins' introduction to the book itself, where he shows how the 12 links are actually presented in a famous sutra, which is a Buddhist text, called the Rice Seedling. Not so surprising, you hear that word seedling, because it has to do with karma and emptiness. And it sort of maps it out in a little bit more detail than I am here. But again, I'm trying not to get too, I'm trying not to get too complex here with the description that we're taking. So I'm going to cover one more link, and then we'll stop for questions. Let me go back to the graphic here. So the next link is this one where we have people in a boat. And the people in the boat, or the person in the boat, if it's only one but both of these images, it's hard to tell. The people in the boat and the boat itself symbolize name and form, which is the name of this link. Name refers to what we call the mental consciousness and the accompanying mental factors of a person. And if you think about this as it relates to the previous link, where we're coming right, this is picking this up right from the moment of conception in a new life, name and form then start. That's when it starts. It starts right at that very first moment, right when an egg of the mother and the sperm of the father join. So that's, just to be very clear, that's when this link starts from a Buddhist cosmology framework. If you take it outside of that, we can see this as name and form in connection with a ripening karmic event, which is an effect consciousness, and that could be applied to many experiences, both in the form of body or in the form of mind, or name, what we call name. So we can, again, constantly be pulling out of the Buddhist framework here and seeing it, outside of that. It doesn't undermine the validity of the schema, if you will. So that's very important. And as one starts to explore Buddhist psychology and philosophy and cosmology and understand name and form, and we'll understand it a little bit more when we start talking about the rest of the 12 links, especially the next two. It will come into focus a lot more with more detail, like what are those mental factors? What does that mean? What does it mean by name? What does name mean? Why do we use the word name in connection with the mental aspect of a new life versus mind or consciousness? There's a real important reason for that. So that's a teaser. Form is kind of easy to understand. So I'm going to leave it there in terms of how far we go as we're getting late. And don't know if anybody has any questions or not, but I want to leave a few minutes for any questions anybody might have. Everybody's flummoxed, huh? Or I did such a good job describing. Go ahead. Good.
The book that you're referring to, could you please give us the title of it?
Sure.
Jeffrey.
And they're also all on the website too. In the description, there's a link to each book.
Thank you.
Yeah. There's on the class page, there's a whole list of books. There's two primary texts. One's called Awakening from the Daydream. That's one text by David Nichtern. The other one is The Wheel of Life, Buddhist Perspectives on Cause and Effect, and that's by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And that's the one I'm referencing. I'm referencing a lot of sources, but I'm distilling a lot of what His Holiness and Jeffrey Hopkins talks about in His Holiness's book, because in that book he addresses the 12 links of dependent origination or dependent arising from a Buddhist, classic Buddhist point of view. Again, as I said at the top of the teaching, there aren't any texts that really try to break it out of that sort of form of presentation. So David Nichtern's book doesn't even really attempt to go there. It's not something that works for him. So Rachel, you have a question? Okay.
Okay, I just want to kind of summarize something that I heard and clarify it. Ask if you could clarify it. So, are you saying that a person born into a life that is perhaps full of physical suffering, or perhaps short, or perhaps someone in a refugee camp type suffering existence, are you saying that birth is a result of all the karmic ripening that stemmed from their choices of living virtuous or non-virtuous actions in body, mind, and soul. Body, mind, and speech. Is that what you're saying? Or am I understanding that?
Yeah, you're understanding that you're understanding that correctly. In a Buddhist frame of reference, which is what we're talking about here with the wheel, everything that a consciousness experiences is derived from the way that consciousness takes and moves forward in there with that consciousness. And from previous in body, speech, or mind, and that presented with the 10 virtuous or 10 non-virtuous activities. And so as one does any one of those, then that creates a action that's completed. And then once it's completed, that's infused, to use His Holiness's word, or the word I like to use is planted in that. And only when that action's completed is it planted in that consciousness. And then eventually that ripens. More specific to your clarifying question, there is a type of projected karmic experience that happens right at the end of one's life that is the sole projected karma that a person then carries into what's called, from a Buddhist point of view, an intermediate experience, because you don't end when you die. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible to carry forward, in a karmic way. And that is what projects that person's consciousness to look for a rebirth. And then that literally means who their mother is. There's an intimate connection between the mother and father and a person who's conceived to a mother and father. That might seem obvious, but from a Buddhist point of view, it's even more significant because of this karmic projection being so specific. There has to be a karmic connection between that person's projecting karma and those parents to allow for that person to then take a specific name and form and have a life, whether it's human or other realm, that has characteristics. Primarily, what realm? Secondarily, male or female or other. Secondarily, all of the experiences that person has, because those are all karmic ripenings that occur. How long they live, how short they live, what kind of diseases they have, what they don't, how smart are they, how not smart are they. Everything that we experience comes with us and is karmic ripening that we experience in that way. So that's what I was trying to explain when I was explaining that affect consciousness, very specific type called the projecting karma, that happens right at the end of a person's life and carries over to their next life.
Do people judge other people who have extreme sufferings as, wow, you really were very non-virtuous in your previous life? I mean, is that a way you would conclude?
Well, we know that people in an ordinary sense do, right? We know that. Just look around. But from a Buddhist point of view, hopefully one of the things that we're all learning just in these set of sessions is that is part of misapprehending moment by moment, by discriminating, by judging, by aversion, which is one of the three poisons. That's like a no-no, right? And as we learned, hopefully in the last class, especially when we talked about the gift, when we talked about the 8 verses of mind training, and we talked about the 4th verse and how it's a gift to have someone present to us in our lives who maybe apparently have a suffering existence. It's an opportunity to exercise extreme, compassion and love, maybe beyond what we can do with our our blood brother, I mean, there's a silver lining to the reality of every sentient being in terms of no matter where they're born. And that's the nature of bodhicitta, and the meditation we did at the beginning today, to see all sentient beings equal, equanimity, right? And then do the mother, the kindness, repaying the kindness, and it's done indiscriminately. So from a Buddhist point of view, experientially, one shouldn't have that present. It's clear that one could function that way. And I think in an ordinary way, unfortunately, part of suffering existence happens all too much, right? But, on paper, ideally, no, we shouldn't be experiencing them that way.
Thank you, John.
Yeah. Janine, do you have the question?
I do, thanks. And thank you so much for this teaching, John. It's really, really clear.
Thanks for getting up early.
So my question is, you mentioned that, obviously the karmic actions plant this seed, and then in the Buddhist perspective, that kind of is able to manifest at the end of life. And so is it true, again, from a Buddhist perspective, that one's karma cannot ripen, cannot reach fruition within the same life, within this current life?
Right. Well, in terms of a certain kind of karma, projecting karma, from a strictly Buddhist frame of reference, the kind that I identified over and over, and I tried to underscore that word projecting karma, it's not an easy question to answer. It sounds like it should be. The answer is that normally it doesn't. It could happen in certain Buddhist practices, like Tantra. And if you think about it, I won't talk about it here, but that if you think about it, if you're a tantric practitioner, it's possible. That's a whole nother class, that maybe we can ask Rinpoche to teach sometime. But yeah, technically speaking, that's the case. There are other kinds of karma, though, which we'll discover, especially when we start talking about the 8th and 9th links, attachment and grasping, that there are key right now to breaking the chain. From a Buddhist point of view, that might mean next lifetime, not this lifetime. But if you're doing certain practices, that all of that goes sort of out the window, if you will, because we're talking about this in the context of what's called sutra, common Buddhist teachings and principles, and not other types of principles that are also taught that are available to humans if they do certain practices. I don't want to say any more than that.
Thank you,
You
John.
asked a difficult question. Yeah, that was a trick question.
Karen has a really great question in the chat too. I just want to point that out.
Okay. Karen says, I imagine we have many effect consciousnesses in place at the time of our death. How do we know or control which one will be projected at the time of death? That's a really great question. One of the you can't like literally know, but one of the things that is a hint is, if you're doing self-reflection, like we talked about in the previous 3 or 4 sessions, like the idea of maybe keeping a book and doing self-reflection on our mental afflictions and how we're really experiencing and mental states and what realm we're in. One of the things that you can zero in on over some period of time is if you see a pattern in your, what we call your wishing. Oh, I wish that if I had to come back again, I'd wish to, be this, or I wish I had this, or those are actually course level, like a course, like meaning like obvious level, indicators of like what might ripen from an effect consciousness projecting karma point of view at the time that you die. The trick is that it has to be a singular karmic ripening. And if you think about, for those who are Buddhists, we know that each one of us have an unfathomable amount of karma. To identify that is pretty hard. And it's one of the reasons, by the way, that in Buddhist teachings, they talk about how a specific projecting karma could take, they say this literally in the Abhidharmakosha, eons to actualize, to take a new birth, a new life, because we have lots of projecting karmas. So it's hard, but there are some sort of ordinary ways that we could observe if we're observant, and then that would be one of them. His Holiness, either His Holiness or Nagarjuna, quoting Nagarjuna, who's a famous Buddhist teacher, specifically pointed that one out to a similar question asked of him. So he either was a question to His Holiness or to Nagarjuna, I can't remember which, but they're just the same anyway. Hopefully that helps a little bit.
Thank you, John.
Another question, yeah, okay. Another question I have is, depending arising also makes sense going backwards. Is there any relevance? This is true. His Holiness talks about that in this text. He talks about, and the Buddha, when I was talking about his, on the night of his enlightenment, doing the exercise of reversing dependent arising links, this was one of the final sort of mental exercises he did for our benefit to break the link. So specifically, if you're studying and contemplating and meditating on reversing, the links, there's benefit in terms of developing a clearer knowledge of how life works in the context of the wheel. And then more specifically, though, it's when you move backwards to the 8th and 9th link that there's real benefit there, and to stop and work on those, which I'll be recommending when we get to those. So there's relevance in the sense that it's fluid either way. And as I said earlier, all the links are happening experientially all the time for all of us on some level. Even death. As Buddhists, we if you do certain practices, you can do a practice where you go through the death experience, just riding in meditation, one breath in and one breath out. That's life and death. It's a complete form of life and death. So within us, we have many lives going on, even down to each breath that we take. So there are. It's not, when we look at it on a picture and we walk through it sequentially, it all seems like very two-dimensional, but it is very dimensional and very experiential. Hopefully that helps. Okay, so Richard asks, please clarify your excellent answer to Janine's excellent question. Is projecting karma the only cause of next life? Is projecting karma the cause of the next life realm, longevity, sex, parents, health? Okay. Or does projecting karma just govern the realm and parents? So the specific effect consciousness projecting karma that I talked about in the class today is one that specifically is the cause. It's not the cause, it's the ripening of a cause that was previously planted. It's the actual full activation of that cause that does then take you through the intermediate state from a Buddhist point of view and brings you directly to a very specific birth in a specific realm with specific parents. It does not govern, to use, I think you used that word, it doesn't have directly an effect on longevity, sex, health, intelligence. In your question in the chat there, I skipped parents because I defined that it does. Rather, there are other karmic ripenings that His Holiness in the text, go and read the text, actually talks about it filling in sort of the rest of your experience in that realm. Once that important projected karma brings you into the union of sperm and egg of your mother in whatever realm, whether it's human realm or some other realm. And from there, it ends, and that's when the fourth link of name and form starts. And an unfathomable amount of karmic ripenings that are in your consciousness then start to ripen, that influence all these other things. And one could think about that, and if you see that as that sort of karmic system in a certain way with clarity, you could see how that it makes sense. It can make sense of the wide variety just of human experience. Why is a baby stillborn? Why can a child die when they're 6 months old? Why could somebody live to 118? Why could somebody smoke their whole life and live to 94? I mean, there's all kinds of things that don't make sense on a course level, but they're part of karmic ripening that you've brought into this life, if you will. It could, there's a case to be made that could help have it make sense for yourself as you might think about that. It could take the there's no rhyme or reason, sort of sentiment and give it some rhyme and reason. I'll say that. That's like a personal observation. So hopefully, Richard, that helped. Okay, good. No other questions. So we'll wrap it up for today. I purposely last class didn't assign the readings because they were so Buddhist. They're coming from the Wheel of Life, Buddhist perspectives on cause and effect. But now that I've sort of framed it and massaged it, hopefully you could go and read the book. Jeffrey Hopkins' introduction is excellent overview. His Holiness' teaching in the bulk of two of the chapters are all about the 12 links. They're very Buddhist, but I think you can find your way through that and put certain things on the shelf and see, relative to all the teachings and classes we've already had, have it make sense for you, even from a non-Buddhist perspective. So I would encourage you to read for the next class, before the next class, which I think again is in 2 weeks. Read the complete introduction, but especially pages 8 through 28 through 27 of the introduction. And then His Holiness is teaching the chapter on the Buddhist worldview. And again, when I said the pages, if you're reading an ebook, it won't be those pages, so you can just read the introduction. And then the chapter called Buddhist Worldview, the entire chapter, and then the chapter called Life Impelled by Ignorance. There's parts of that we covered previously, but there are parts of that are not covered. And then he talks, towards the end of that, he talks about dependent arising and a couple of other interesting topics. And then you could, if you have time, look at the chapter called Levels of the Path, which is very valuable. So, you know, this is where the teaching from a Buddhist point of view could get a little bit like, maybe make your brain a little numb. So, you know, I'm leaving a lot out because I don't want to go into too much detail that goes beyond my intended scope of this class, and hopefully I've been able to stick to that. So that would be it, and I'm going to try to finish the course next week. I mean, we only went through the first 4 links, so there's 8 more to go, but I think we could probably get through all of them. I'm confident we can, and then, you know, we could say it's a wrap. So if you can, try to attend the next class, and we'll try to, you know, do a walkthrough and a wrap up of the last 8 links. That's it. So I would say that we are done. We don't need to do a meditation because we've already done the one at the beginning. So as we traditionally do, I would just like to say that we're doing the teaching with the right motivation and intent, and hopefully you guys are doing it with the right motivation as students for the benefit of others. Try to develop bodhicitta, and make that be something that you're carrying through, you know, all these classes. And remember, this is only part 1. It's study. Try to reflect on what we've been studying and try to do some meditation on what we've been studying. Those are the three legs of the stool, you know, in terms of these kinds of teachings. Otherwise, you know, it doesn't get sort of in there, and we don't wake up, which is the name of the course. We want to wake up. So I'll just end it with a quick dedication that we normally do. By the goodness of the deed that I've just done, may all sentient beings complete the collection of merit and wisdom, and thus gain the ultimate 2 bodies that wisdom and merit make. May what we've learned here today be wholly dedicated to the future well-being and happiness of all sentient beings, where there is no longer any suffering existence and only happiness and endless joy. So that's it.
Thank you so much, John.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
John. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.